All right, everyone. Welcome to my webinar about AI and entertainment. I'll try to keep it short, but there's a lot of ground to cover, but welcome on this day. And for those of you who are out there, yes, I'm recording it. And this deck that you'll be seeing and I'll be walking through, yes, I'm happy to share it. Just reach out to me at the email address that you see right there, and then I'm happy to share it with you. But there is a lot of uncertainty in this business about how generative AI is going to be impacting the entertainment industry. And I'll get into that with the recent developments and specific companies and specific things that all of you can do. So a lot of ground to cover. At the end, I will take questions. And so this is what I suggest. I suggest that in the Q&A, there's a tab for you to be able to identify if you have a question. I will get to as many of those as I can at the end. But first, I'm going to go through all of this. And just a little background about me, just very quickly. I'm the chairman of Creative Media. I've been in the media and entertainment and tech space for over 30 years. I've worn a lot of different hats, and so my perspectives are pretty broad because I come into contact with a lot of different people who are in the space in all aspects of it. And I started out as an intellectual property entertainment attorney. So from a legal background perspective, and there's a lot of legalities to get into too, practical legalities, don't worry. And I will get into that, but that background is helpful. Then I went into the studio. So I have the studio and the traditional media content creator perspective because I was a business executive there for a number of years at New Line Cinema and then Universal Studios. Then I became a serial entrepreneur of several different tech forward media companies. And so technology is something near and dear to me. I'm certainly no engineer, but I understand it pretty deeply and I'm not afraid of it. But with AI and with all new technologies, we need to be stoic about it, understand not only the possibilities, but also the risks and the impacts on life as we know it today, and the industry that we love so much, which is the media and entertainment business. And then for the past several years, I've been an advisor, connector, all those sorts of things. And I do a lot of journalism. So I think several of you out there follow what I write. I have a weekly column in The Wrap, which is a great publication where I tackle a lot of these issues of AI and how it impacts creativity in the entertainment industry, and several other things. But with that, I want to just get into it. Fun fact, for those of you who were holding before I started, I always try to bring in a song that kind of captures the essence of what the subject matter is going to be. And some of you may know that was Alan Parsons Project's song Breakdown from the album I, Robot. So that's the connection. I already gave you a little bit of background. Save your questions, but put them into the Q&A and I'll get to them. So my background comes with, I laid out what I've done and the kind of the worlds I've been in, but I try to dig as deeply as possible into AI and generative AI and how a number of companies, the big tech companies, the big media companies, the tech entrepreneurs, the influencers, the creators, how creators think about it. I get these broad perspectives which shape the kinds of things going to be listening to today and what I have laid out in my deck. So let's first set the stage about AI and generative AI and what the world is like today in terms of its impact, not only in the media and entertainment business, but just on our lives in general. First of all, let's not forget that generative AI really, really came into the zeitgeist of all of us less than 1 year ago. I think a lot of times it's almost easy to forget that fact that less than 1 year ago, it was that OpenAI launched ChatGPT into a largely unsuspecting world and transformed our thinking and elevated it when it comes to AI and impact on society in a way that we just never really thought about before on a mass scale. So look how far in 1 year's time things have come and how important these issues have become to all of us. Couple of weeks ago, I moderated a couple panels at the Wrap's The Grill event in Los Angeles. And I had two different panels. One panel was about generative AI in Hollywood, and it was great. Mark Mothersbaugh, Devo, was one of the panelists, several AI tech companies, as well as media companies represented on it. I started the presentation by saying a year before that, AI wasn't even on the radar screen of being a topic at the event. That's how fast things have gone. And here's the thing. The CEOs from the biggest companies, whether it's Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Amazon, all of them concede that they don't know precisely how the sausage is made. They don't know precisely how a work that is created is created. They know generally how it's created, but they don't know precisely how the ultimate output is achieved when it comes to the black box of generative AI and the inputs that we put into it. Think about that. So that means that even the smartest minds, when it comes to developing the technology we're talking about, don't know exactly how it does what it does, or certainly none of us know exactly where it's going to be going. And so, just like with any new technology that's game-changing, there's always going to be a lot of confusion, understandably, uncertainty, understandably, and also fear, very real fear, which is understandable. And what I caution people all the time is that with new technology, and media and entertainment historically has a tendency to put, in a mass generalization, their heads in the sand about the impacts on the current business such as it is and the business models such as they are. Well, I understand the fear, but we can't put our heads in the sand. We need to look at things stoically. This is where we are. This is a technology that is here to stay. It's no flavor of the month. And so what can we do? And I'm going to get into some of the things that we can do to leverage it to our advantage the best we can. So look, just setting the stage a little bit in terms of guardrails. So like, what controls the development of generative AI? Well, the reality is, not surprisingly, based on what I said, that there are very few guardrails that exist. So certainly the commercial incentives are not there to slow down. You may recall that several months ago, scores and scores of leading figures in technology signed onto an open letter saying that we should put a 6-month pause on the development of generative AI. But nobody believed that that was going to happen. And for obvious reasons, because if I pause, the next guy's not going to pause, or the next government's not going to pause. And so I can't, because I'm disincentivized to put any kind of pause on things. And so, in fact, the incentives are to accelerate development so you become a leading figure in it. Here's something I woke up to today that shows that point. Microsoft just announced its quarterly earnings. I think it was yesterday, just yesterday. Their quarterly earnings smashed it. And the reason why they smashed it, it's largely attributable to its investment in OpenAI and how OpenAI, which launched ChatGPT into the world, has performed monetarily over the last quarter. So that's the incentive. I haven't looked at the stock market today, but I would imagine that it's up significantly for Microsoft. So for those of you who have invested in Microsoft, good for you. And certainly, okay, so that's the commercial incentives. Governments certainly aren't equipped. Look what's happening in Washington. And notoriously, governments and the figures, when you look at the demographics in Congress, the figures aren't very deep when it comes to technological shifts. So these are the bodies around the world that are trying to create some kind of guardrail, some kind of regulation on all the development that's going on. Imagine how smart those regulations will be. You can guess. And so governments are ill-equipped to be able to do that. So what is the central guardrail when it comes to media and entertainment and generative AI? I think the biggest guardrail, the biggest thing that the creators who want to use and leverage generative AI need to think about are existing copyright laws, because the US Copyright Office does not grant any copyright protection for AI only generated works. creative works. So there must be human interaction or involvement at scale to be able to qualify for copyright protection. And of course, copyright protection gives the creator, who invests a lot of time and money typically, the ability to have exclusivity over that so it cannot be copied. So they get the exclusivity to be able to monetize it as well as derivative works based on that. So US copyright law, such as it is, which is prohibiting AI only works from getting copyright protection, is the biggest guardrail that I see when it comes to the media and entertainment business. The other guardrail really, as best as organizations can, is to have a collective voice, whatever side of the aisle you are. If you want to accelerate AI, or if you want to slow down and really think about the significant implications on creativity and the jobs, et cetera, that come into play. It's about organizing, collaborating, creating a collaborative voice. And there's a couple organizations I'll talk about at the very end that are in that world of collaboration. Certainly, the Writers Guild of America, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, just resolved its strike with the major streamers and Hollywood studios. And for them, there was essentially a punt on one of the central issues, and that was about AI and how AI can train by training its large language model on existing or pre-existing works like scripts, things like that. Okay, so just very quickly, let's not forget that AI in entertainment and creativity is nothing new. Generative AI is, but AI itself is nothing new, AI and machine learning. And we've used it now for many, many years, which AI has democratized and disrupted creativity. Disruption doesn't necessarily mean a pejorative thing, by the way, in the way that I'm using it. But AI certainly democratizes creativity. So just think, like any new technology, that's what it typically does. So, back in the day, before we had our iPhones and our smartphones that had these great, our great cameras where we could take pictures anytime we wanted at very high resolution and take videos anytime we wanted, we were dependent upon, much more dependent on professional photographers and photographers to take a lot of the pictures that we took. So think about it. Think about what that did. It gave us all the ability to create professional looking pictures. Now, that's a wonderful thing for the consumers, but there's disruption in that, certainly to the industry and to jobs when it comes to taking pictures and the editing of pictures, things like that. Similarly, like think about Adobe and Photoshop and all the kinds of things that you can do as a creator now very easily. All of us can do it because it's very easy to use. Well, not that long ago, only the great specialists could do that. And that was their jobs to do that. And they were charging a lot of money to be able to do that. So new technology always does that. Generative AI is no exception. So as I write here, new technology always comes with opportunity, as I mentioned, angst for the reasons I mentioned, and unintended consequences. I mean, nobody knows where the technology ultimately leads us. And so when it comes to AI, here's one specific example. There's a company called Boomi that democratizes the ability for any of us, no matter how musically inclined we are or we are not, to be able to write songs very easily, just write songs and immediately distribute them across different platforms. And I just checked Boomi yesterday. If you look at their website, they say that they have now enabled through their AI nearly 18 million what they call original songs. Now, we'll talk about originality later on because that's a big debate, but that's what they do. Here's a little unintended consequence of that. I recently read a report that said 13% of all music on music streaming services is AI generated. 38 million songs have received 0 plays. Think about that. So is there a quality aspect to it? Discoverability? I mean, this gets into originality, what speaks to us as human beings, what we engage in. So that's democratizing. AI certainly enables better experiences in many respects. So think of the major streaming services. They've used AI and machine learning for a long time to give you better recommendations, crunching the data to be able to do that, giving you a personalized experience. So like when I go to my Netflix experience is different than your Netflix experience. Certainly, things like I will get personalized trailers over time that make me engage more or satisfied with things. And that is just some of the things that have already been happening. And what I write here is that big tech DNA. So you have in the streaming world, you have the streamers like the Netflixes, like Apple TV, like Amazon Prime Video that really come from big tech. So they're tech first media companies, which have really taken over Hollywood versus the more traditional media companies and their streaming services. What I say here, and it goes to all forms of technology and media, I believe, is that the big tech companies, it's in their DNA to be willing to experiment more readily and more aggressively with new technology, including generative AI, because their DNA is just fundamentally different. They started as tech. Perhaps there's even less relationships with the creative community that they were, quote unquote, worry about because of that. All right. So let's get into some of the opportunities. And again, I'm sure you're all going to have a lot of questions because there's a lot of material here. Just put them in the Q&A and I'll get to them at the end. So generative AI, as I said, is new, even though AI in the world of media and entertainment isn't. It's new in the sense that it just came to the forefront in all of our minds less than 1 year ago. So generative AI allows entirely new forms of creative works and experiences. These are the positives. So of course, of examples of AI generated art, AI generated music, videos, all forms of media. So some are more sophisticated than others. You look at ChatGPT, and of course, that's the word, that's writing. But then there's Stability AI and many other companies like Midjourney that are in the visuals, Adobe Firefly, I'll talk a little bit more about that allow visuals. But there's certainly generative AI in the video space too, which is not quite getting into feature film length yet, but you can bet that's going to be happening not in the not too distant future, sooner than you think. And one of the things I mentioned here is that while it's daunting, just because it creates entirely new creative works doesn't necessarily mean that it's cannibalistic. I certainly believe that we humans love engaging with cool content and experiences. And just because I do this doesn't mean that I also don't do this. There may be some cannibalizing because we have limited time in a day, but nonetheless, if I like this AI generated work, I still may like the song I was listening to that is not AI generated. They're not mutually exclusive. One of the things that I do, I have a very interesting podcast on Consequence Podcast Network where I interview major artists like, whether it's Pink Floyd, Blondie, Gary Newman, Devo, and a number of these iconic artists, as well as some contemporary artists. It's actually pretty cool because their stories are great. It's called The Story Behind the Song. You may want to check it out. And so I have access to a number of major artists, and I frequently ask them about their feelings as creators about generative AI and how they feel about it. So Mark Mothersbaugh, as I said, of Devo, but he's also one of the most prolific scorers, musical composers in Hollywood today and has been for years. Mark was on my panel a couple of weeks ago, and he's excited by the possibilities of how he can use generative AI to create new things. He's excited. He doesn't fear it. He's excited by it. Gary Newman's much the same way. Now, Gary Newman, who created the song Cars, the classic song Cars, among others, obviously they always use technology to create new sounds, entirely new sounds. And think about that. In the past, when synthesizers came on, there was a lot of fear and loathing by other musicians out there because of the obvious things where if you use a synthesizer, you may not need as many session musicians, things like that. But ultimately, these artists created entirely new kinds of works that otherwise would not have been possible without technology. So there's the positive. I say, but Alex Ebert. Alex Ebert is the lead singer of the group Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. You, I'm sure, know the song Home, even if you don't know the name of the band. But Alex, I know Alex well. Alex is somebody who has always been a technology wonk. He's been involved in technology companies. He doesn't fear technology companies, and he's a super smart guy. But Alex has also become a Hollywood composer, and he feels that he's getting very, very good at what he does. So he's very proficient. He's a very talented guy. I had him on a panel several months ago, really a few months after ChatGPT, and he was very much voicing a very different feeling where it wasn't fear as much as he was very concerned about how AI can create musical scores that will supplant him as a human being and his job, his opportunities in the space of Hollywood creation and composing for film and television. So he absolutely feels that there's this cannibalistic nature to it, but also he also feels that there's that AI, generative AI, based on the fact that it's scraping pre-existing works, is not capable of creating something entirely new or novel or original. And so it will ultimately lead to mediocrity, like everything closing into mediocrity. And that is a great debate. So those are different perspectives on from a creative standpoint, which is important. So let's talk about new market. A generative AI certainly creates new markets and new monetization and business model opportunities. Absolutely, it does. And I'll give you a couple examples. So there's a company called Lore Machine that I've followed very closely. Very smart guy named Toby Campion is the man behind it. He was at Vice for a number of years. Really creative, very thoughtful, thinks about all of these kind of issues well. Lore Machine's interesting because it works with traditional media companies to, as an example, take scripts that have been gathering dust at the studio over the years, and they wouldn't have been produced. They're gathering dust. So he works in partnership with studios and other partners to take some of that pre-existing work that otherwise would not see the light of day and put them into his model and his generative AI model and create visuals like storybook. He calls them storyscapes, which are almost like animated picture books that take the script and turn them into an audio visual experience. And that's really cool. And what's really cool about it is that he works with the studios, as I said. So the creators are involved. They opt in. He only does that if they opt in and participate. And the reason why they would is because their works that otherwise wouldn't see the light of day, they do. They have a chance to reach an audience. And that way, the artists also get to financially participate in the work as it monetizes. So it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting opt-in model, and I'll talk more about that. There's a company called Flawless, and this comes from the minds of Hollywood. Some very talented executives are behind it, including Jen Hollingsworth, who I've known for a number of years, who was the COO, I believe, at Lionsgate for a number of years. She came over to Flawless, and what Flawless does is their technology enables media companies to take their, let's, for example, take a film or television series that's in English. I'll make another example. I'm Hungarian. So let's say there's a film that's created in Hungarian. That's the language. Obviously, there's a limited audience, no matter how good the film is, for a Hungarian-speaking film. Yes, there can be subtitling, and a lot of people like subtitles. And even when it's English speaking, and for those of us who that's our native language. But in the Hungarian film example, there's a limited audience, which is not great for the filmmaker who wants to reach as far and wide of an audience as possible. What Flawless does is technology takes the actor's voice. Let's say I'm the lead role in that Hungarian film, takes my voice and uses my same voice and puts it into multiple different languages, whether I know those languages or not. And it also syncs perfectly my mouth to the new language. And so the Hungarian filmmaker creates this film now in myriad languages, multiple languages, German, English, Portuguese, whatever it may be, and releases the film concurrently across all these territories in the native tongue, and it looks like I'm speaking the native tongue. Think about what that does. I mean, that's a really interesting experience and opportunity for those who are creators to reach a much broader audience, and that's a great thing. Then in the music world, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the artist Grimes, who's always been tech forward. She and Elon Musk were married at some time and have several kids together. So there's a certain symmetry there with the way that they think, obviously. So Grimes is immensely talented. And so she is an artist who has really reimagined how musicians with followers, with substantial followers, can take generative AI and bring it to their advantage. What she does, she created something called ELF Tech. So if you go elf.tech, you'll find her, what she does. And what she has done is she gives anybody in the world, her fans or anyone, if you go to ELF Tech, you can take snippets of her song and her voice and then use generative AI to create entirely new songs. Entirely new songs. Think about that. And the reason why she does that is because if any one of those songs becomes a hit and starts monetizing, her only condition is that she shares 50% of that monetization. So it's an incentive for her fans to create based or reimagine her works, create their own, originals in Grimes's voice and put it out there into the world and see what happens. So Grimes not only monetizes that if something bubbles up and actually starts monetizing, even though she had nothing to do with the creation of it, but not only that, it leads to a continuing supply of new music that is from Grimes, in a way, from Grimes, which makes her fans very, very happy. And because they want more and more of Grimes, not less. And here's the thing. Just because there's this now volume of Grimes-inspired new music doesn't mean that Grimes' original stuff, without any kind of generative AI, is not coveted by her fans. In fact, I would argue that it makes them even more hungry and excited once her pure Grimes-created works come out into the world. But that's easy for a Grimes because she has substantial followers, so she's known by a large group of people. If you're a Hollywood writer and the same kind of thing happens where your writing is reimagined, you don't have a bunch of followers. You're more anonymous, and so the same power doesn't flow there. So that's an example. And then, of course, there's name, likeness, and voice and style issues, licensing opportunities for talent, for creators out there. So, generative AI will be able to do the kinds of things we're talking about, creating full-length feature films ultimately. That will happen in the not too distant future. So you can imagine a case where Tom Cruise Mission Impossible 20 is in production. Tom Cruise is on a beach sipping his margaritas. Meanwhile, the script was generated, subject to the copyright thing, where if it's purely AI generated, then it's not going to be entitled to copyright protection. But you know the point. AI can create the script, AI can create the actors, AI can create all the, the storylines, et cetera, and produce the film and create a very high quality feature film that looks to us like a film that we see today. And these will be incredibly lucrative licensing opportunities for artists and creators out there. So name, like this voice, as I said. Style is an interesting one where you have an example of generative art. One of the big problems, and we'll get into some of the legalities, is that if like Midjourney, which is generative AI that takes visuals and then creates an entirely new novel visual. So you've seen it, you've probably heard about examples of, okay, I want to create a visual of me sitting at a desk giving a webinar in the style of Vincent van Gogh. And if the AI is scraping or training purely on Van Gogh images, well, you can imagine that if Vincent were alive today, he may not be thrilled by the fact that there's a generative AI that's trying to create entirely in his style. Now, some of you out there will say, well, humans are inspired by Vincent van Gogh all the time and emulate his style. The difference is, and this is a fundamental difference that is frequently lost on people, is that generative AI actually trains on exact copies of those works that are in its training set. So that's very different when it's actually scraping the actual text or visuals to train its AI, because that is technically copying. Whereas if Peter Csathy is trying to paint and I'm a Vincent van Gogh photo or image, then I'm not copying it. I'm inspired by it. I may be trying to copy it, but I'm not technically copying it. Gets into a lot of issues like that. I mentioned James Earl Jones here because there's an example of an actor who's, I think he's well into his 90s now. He's not acting in any films, but James Earl Jones was in a recent Star Wars film of some kind. So he licensed his likeness, his voice, and everything. He gets paid even though he's not participating. That's what technology can do. AI can also lead to new efficiencies, of course. And the argument there is that those efficiencies lead to more time for creativity, less for menial tasks, which is always the case when it comes, not always, but frequently the case when it comes to new technology. So think about what Pixar did to traditional animation. Before Pixar, Disney artists would be hand-framed drawing each picture. Now, there's a beautiful art to that, but imagine the length of time it takes to realize the vision of the film. Well, Pixar came in with computer-generated animation and really disrupted and transformed the industry. For many, it was not welcome because it disrupted their jobs. Traditional animators, obviously, that was not a happy development. But on the flip side, it created an entirely new industry with new jobs, things like that, which is very typical that happens. And there's a lot of pain with that. So I don't want to minimize the human pain. It's akin to what happened with factories on automation. Here's a company, a leading company in the pre-visualization and virtual set space, is a company called Seihan Lee. And Seihan Lee is, you'll be able to Google and find and kind of see what it's all about. But essentially, you've probably heard about The Mandalorian, where they have the production is a virtual production with a 270-degree stage or visual screen behind you that moves, so the images move as the actors move in front of it. So it's like this super high-tech green screen. Well, that's a virtual production. And obviously that technology means that now crews don't need to go out into the desert to film a desert scene, etc. Well, what Seihan Lee does is you can immediately come onto that stage, with the screen behind you, and you can pre-visualize what something will look like even before production. So I'll have my little laptop there and I'll put in my prompts, and all of a sudden there'll be a desert scene and I'll be able to adjust it by adding more prompts, things like that. So there's great efficiencies with that. And many would argue that gets rid of the mundane and allows the creator to more easily and more cost effectively come up with their vision, realize their vision. And then just imagine all the marketing, branding, support video or support opportunities where customer support. I want a new logo for something. I want a new brand, anything like that, new copy for an article or for marketing materials for a film or something like that. Well, generative AI can, of course, give you endless iterations, which is great in many respects, but also for those who are in that industry, those writers, it's not so great. There's a story that just came out today, so this is fresh information. That's what I try to give you. A company called Synthesia, you should look it up, synthesia.io. I followed them from the very beginning. They presented at UTA Talent Agency about 6 years ago as this tiny little startup, and I immediately saw what they were doing. They do essentially what Flawless does, the company I mentioned, which can in real time essentially take my voice, put it in multiple languages. And so like for customer support videos, for promo videos, you can imagine that it's very easy now to generate them. So entirely new categories of jobs. Prompt engineers is one where a prompt in, many jobs will be lost, new jobs will be found. Where it all goes, nobody knows. But there's the good, there's the flip side, as there always is. So let's talk a little bit more about the flip side and disruption. So ChatGPT, and this was in an OpenAI research report. ChatGPT was asked, what is AI good at? One of the answers is tasks that require creativity. And in its recent study, one of the findings it had was that writers of all kind are 100% exposed to disruption in their lives due to generative AI. That's why it's no mystery that AI was front and center in the WGA and Screen Actors Guild negotiations, which the WGA, of course, just resolved the strike. Essentially, I say here, an AI, by the way, generative AI was front and center properly in both negotiations. SAG is still out negotiating. But on the WGA, what they did with AI was essentially a punt. The punt is, I think it was for a period of 3 years, where the writers do not want Hollywood to be able, the studios and the streamers, to be able to create new scripts by training on pre-existing material. Meanwhile, the studios and streamers want to reserve the right to be able to keep that position that they want to be able to train and create new scripts based on pre-existing material. Of course, there's the copyright component that kind of overlays it all by, if a script is purely AI generated, then the studios don't like that because they don't have their monopoly and exclusivity and they've invested all this money. But that's the push and the pull. So the parties just decided to punt, which I actually think is smart, to see where things go. I actually think that the writers, because it's a punt that way for 3 years, they'll be watching very closely, and there'll be a tremendous pressure not to disrupt the world of, their worlds too much, but nonetheless, there's significant impacts here. Then, of course, all creators and entertainment jobs are vulnerable. Journalism, novels. I'll give the example of BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed, you all know BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed laid off most of its writers, I think a very significant number, if not virtually all of them, and decided to go almost purely with generative AI created content and news stories and things like that. And the CEO of the company saw what happened with ChatGPT coming out. Everybody's thinking about generative AI, and so wanted to reduce his costs, improve the stock price, and get a reaction from the market that they are being economically changing their economics to the advantage of investors. That's what BuzzFeed did. About fake Drake, David Guetta, the DJ, he created just for personal use, really, for like a personal party sort of thing, a fake Eminem song. That's why it's M-N-A-I-M song that sounds like Eminem. The voice is Eminem essentially, but Eminem had nothing to do with it. And so, yes, there's interesting things, but you need licensing for that. You need consent for that. And then I mentioned Alex Ebert of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, how he feels that, he emphasizes, of course, the disruption to his job and the need for consent and licensing, but also this, what he calls this journey to mediocrity. Graphic and visual arts. I talked about Midjourney and Stability AI already. An important case to follow there is Getty Images. Many of you know that, where Getty Images sued these generative AI companies that are in the visual space because they're training their large language model or their AI models on all these copyrighted works, including Getty image photographs. And then I mentioned videos, motion pictures. It's going to go all the way down the line. Scaling up content. So you can imagine that, like, here's something that I think is absolutely possible. Netflix spends, boatloads of money on content every year. So it's at about, it has been at about $17 billion annually on content costs, creating content, licensing content. Netflix just announced killer results when it comes to its what they call free cash flow. So essentially more money coming in than going out. Typically over years, Netflix actually was very challenged to be a profitable company under, just from a kind of a vernacular standpoint. But now it had one of its best, if not best quarters ever in terms of free cash flow. So positive cash. And the reason being is because of the writer's strike, it did not have to pay out as much for content. Maybe there's a little bit less content on Netflix, but did most of us really notice that that was the case? And that emboldens Netflix and others like it to spend less perhaps on original content created in the more traditional way, and essentially ultimately maybe use generative AI to to create films and series and videos more and more as the years go on. And that will reduce its costs, of course, which will then please Wall Street investors, certainly won't please the creative community. All right, so let's get a kind of a legal lesson in terms of things, because, as I told you, I'm an IP lawyer by trade. I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but these are issues that all of you need to know, whether you're creators, whether you're managers, whether you're tech executives, media executives. So I talked about training. I think maybe in a more pejorative way, scraping, but training, scraping. The reality is that a lot of these models essentially take the body of work that's out there on the open web and uses that body of work to train its models, its generative AI models. And swept up in all of that is copyright infringement, of course, copyrighted works. And so the question becomes, and this is a fundamental question that's in the courts right now. Let's say I wrote an article, which I do all the time. My articles are swept up as part of the training and scraping of these models. That is technically, I would say, copyright infringement. I didn't give any consent for that. But the defense of one of these companies, let's say I went to court and said, hey, that is copyright infringement. You can't do that. I'm seeking damages. The defense to that is fair use. And that's what you're seeing in the courts. There's the claim of copyright infringement and then the defense of fair use. And essentially, the fair use argument is that, listen, man, we're sweeping up millions of works here. And so how can you say that the work that's output from the prompts that are put in, even though I scraped your work, how can you say that there was any real impact or that there was any real value added by your work to the ultimate product that came out? So it's almost like that amount of copying is de minimis, too small, too insignificant. So the question becomes, in all these copyright cases, how much training or scraping and how little the training set is necessary for something to be an infringement that causes damages, or instead a fair use, which is defensible and does not resort in a finding of copyright infringement. That's the fundamental question, where to draw the line. And the courts right now in real time are drawing the line. And here's the thing about courts. These aren't necessarily experts when it comes to these issues. Of course not. Nonetheless, you have somebody, I was a law clerk for a federal judge. My judge had me writing opinions on things. So you may have law clerks just graduated from law school who are creating the rulings that are coming from the bench, and these become precedent. So the early precedents have outsized influence on the world. That's why this is so important to follow. you have major cases. Universal Music Group just sued Anthropic, which is a major AI company that's backed by Amazon. Amazon just recently announced that it's going to be investing up to $4 billion in Anthropic. Think of it as them as a competitor to OpenAI. But that's a major lawsuit. I literally just wrote about this. It was just posted yesterday in the Wrap. It's my most recent column. I urge you to check it out because it talks about a previous massive tech transformation and how that ended up and how I believe that the same result's going to happen here. Sarah Silverman, the comedian, you may have heard, she has a lawsuit with other people because her books, her works are included in training sets. So these are the questions that come into play. I mentioned Getty Images. And I mentioned Warhol here not because I like Andy Warhol. I don't have an opinion of Andy Warhol. He was a fine artist. Who doesn't like Campbell soup cans? But Warhol was a big, significant US Supreme Court ruling that just came down several months ago. And here's the thing about that case. It created a new thread of the framework in which the courts should be looking at claims of copyright infringement. In the past, the fair use defense that I was talking about kind of got into the whole world of, well, was this work that is alleged to have been copyright, is it substantially similar to the work that says that has been infringed? So it's this substantial similarity test. That still comes into play, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the only thing. And in the case of Warhol, it was more the result of infringement. It was seen to be an infringement, that it was more about the artist that brought the claim against Warhol's estate. It's more about whether that artist, who was a photographer in that case, lost out on a commercial opportunity, on a revenue generating stream, a potential business opportunity because of the actions of Andy Warhol. So there's this new economic test that was brought into it, which is going to be brought into, like, if I'm going to be a plaintiff who's suing for copyright infringement, and if I can make a connection that, okay, what's happening over here by generative AI is stealing my opportunities, like if it's writing an article in the style of Peter Csathy, and Peter Csathy did not license that, then that's a very important element to think about. And in my article that I just mentioned, that was my column from yesterday, I talk about how ultimately, no matter how the courts end up on this, big tech will win again. And what I'm not saying, I'm not like a doomsayer here that generative AI is all bad, but let's look at the realities of economics. Big tech has multi-trillion-dollar valuations, whereas the biggest media company out there, traditional media company, which is Disney, has $150 billion market valuation. There's a reason why writers are we're on strike, and SAG is on strike right now. Big tech, when new technology comes in, and we can have a conversation offline. I can go on and on about that. But ultimately, big tech is the big winner here. And I would say that big tech is the big winner on the backs of creators, artists, musicians. They also can learn to leverage AI for their benefit, but ultimately the scale of it all really inures to the benefit of big tech. And I led tech-forward media companies, so I'm not afraid of technology. So there's new, I mentioned this already. Some of you out there are going to say, again, Peter, come on, that's doom and gloom. People from the beginnings of time have been inspired by and copied others, but that's different. Humans being inspired and trying to do exactly the same style is still going to be different than an actual copy that's being made by technology. It's just different. So it's apples and oranges. There are new approaches developing. I mentioned Grimes, I mentioned Lore Machine already, where rather than this unlicensed, unconsented scraping or training of all these copyrighted works, these companies or these artists go directly to the source and ask for their works for them to opt in to see whether they want to be part of the training set and then share in the economics. That is happening more and more. I mentioned Adobe Firefly because Adobe, of course, all the creator tools out there. Firefly is its its generative AI element or component to its overall suite. And it only utilizes licensed works in its training set. So I don't know how many images are in there, but there's a lot of them. All of them have been licensed, which means that those who created the work have been paid. So the opt-in framework is going to be increasingly a way to go. I believe it's the right way to go. We can talk about that offline. And then for those who are trying to understand whether their works, like let's say they're complaining, they're bringing an infringement suit or something like that, there's a whole new world of forensic AI. Just like any time that there's new technology, you have hackers who are like using it for their advantage, and you have a kind of a counter reaction of those technologists who are trying to find technology to be able to identify that hack and also control it or mitigate some of it. Same thing's happening in the world of generative AI, where you have this whole world of forensic AI, where you have players who are funded and creating businesses to identify and track what works, what copyrighted works have been in the training set. So, I mentioned something here, you should look it up. Intel has a My Art, My Choice initiative, which you should read about, which kind of gets into that world and addresses it. And then there's some other companies who are embedding digital watermarks into images to help identify. As I mentioned before, US Copyright Office is the real guardrail here because ultimately AI generated works do not create or cannot be protectable. Then you get into the whole thing I already talked about a little bit about name, image, likeness, voice, style. All of these, if somebody is taking my work, my image, my voice, etc., that's going to be something that's my right of publicity. That's me. You need to license it from me to be able to utilize it in your generative works. That's going to be a very significant new opportunity for many artists, many creators out there, where they'll be able to passively receive income from a whole new world of works that they otherwise would not have participated in. But there's going to be a lot of litigation about whether something was licensed or not. And I mentioned in particular style, we talked about a little bit, because in the style of Vincent van Gogh is one thing versus in the style of, if it's only Vincent in the training set, or if it's like this massive training set, but you still have a prompt in the style of, and it's not going to be as precise because it's a much larger training set. You're going to get into all these issues of how much is copying that requires consent and monetization participation and how much doesn't. All of this, I mentioned voice too, and I just think it's interesting that years ago, Tom Waits, the singer, actually sued Frito-Lay. I think it was like Lay potato chips, because there was a voice in the commercial that sounded a lot like Tom Waits, but they didn't come to Tom Waits, the musician, the singer, to be able to use that voice that sounds like him. And there's a California case that was a sound-alike case, but it was a California case. There is no national federal right of publicity, which like federal protection for your voice, et cetera, name likeness. These are all state enabled, but there's a big push on Washington, D.C. right now for a federal, what they call right of publicity, that covers all of that. And then ultimately, and I write about this a lot, can generative AI operating on its own ever create something that is truly original, truly novel? As I mentioned, Alex Ebert from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros says absolutely not. Ultimately, it leads to more mediocrity and mundane. It's like there's nothing new. And so we get into this creative, artistic kind of morass of nothingness, which we get used to, but is rather sad. And I believe, I believe that. I believe that human emotions can only come from human beings, and generative AI just doesn't have the human experience. It can process what a human experience is, but by definition, not human. And so the connection is going to be very different. And there's going to be the experiential aspect of it, but there's this great new book by Rick Rubin, the pioneering music producer, about creativity. And one of the things he says is that generative AI and AI can never create something that is entirely novel because humans make mistakes. It's almost like the errors are what makes something that connects directly to a human being that generative AI will never get. It will never fully understand. So generative AI may be able to do this Peter Csathy webinar to you and do it better than I'm doing it as a human being, but it won't know exactly what word I will say next. Just like I don't know what I'm going to say next. Hopefully it's something that is interesting to all of you. So this is what you can do. You got to create your game plan. Like I said, you can't fear AI. This is the reality. This is where we are. Stoicism is key whenever it comes to new disruption, new technology. You have to learn to understand the language of AI. All of you, no matter what role you play in the ecosystem of creativity, media, and entertainment, or technology. You have to understand and learn the language of AI so you get it yourself, so you can speak the vernacular, so you have credibility, so you can work with other people, you can advise them, help them, work with them, collaborate with them. So it's important to read, listen to podcasts as you're walking your dogs. There's a lot to listen to. You have to curate, but nonetheless, it's very important, and follow developments closely. As you do that, you'll identify some of the leading companies, minds, creators. Ezra Klein's a great one, by the way, on his podcast. And you will be able to understand who the leaders are, what they're doing, who the biggest challengers are, who the biggest voices or advocates to control AI development. You'll learn those different perspectives, and you'll be able to curate and follow them and be even more efficient in terms of like getting the best inputs in terms of your overall thinking. Certainly attending industry meetups is a good thing to do. There's a great organization called AILA that doesn't just focus on media and entertainment, but that's part of what they do. So getting those perspectives and differing perspectives is important. One of the things that you can do if you're an organization is that once you've identified some of these leading voices on both sides, the tech companies, the creators, reach out to them and ask them to come in and give you a demonstration of what their technology does, how they think about it, and you'll be shocked, depending on what organization you are, at how many of these different entrepreneurs, innovators will do that for free just because they want to have your audience. Certainly band together on whatever, however your perspective is, find like-minded players and amplify your voice by organizing, collaborating. There's over 150 media and entertainment and music organizations banded together to create what is called the Human Artistry Campaign for that very reason. They are now testifying in front of Congress and helping to shape policy. And then, of course, retain experts who can guide you through all of this, identifying all the kinds of things that we're talking about. And I would like to think that I'm one of them. So don't hesitate to reach out. And so here's some resources for you. I have this weekly column every Tuesday morning that's in the Wrap, great industry trade publication. I don't always, but I frequently write about AI, these topics that we're talking about. I have a free Fearless Media newsletter, that's what it's called, on Substack. And again, I frequently write about these issues, including leading voices and companies who are in that world. Creating private, customized webinars, presentations, any of that, I certainly can do that with you, for you. And then reach out to me at creativemedia.biz with whatever questions or feedback, including feedback about this webinar, which I would very much appreciate. And if you want a copy of this deck, reach out and I'm happy to share it with you. Like I said, there'll be a video recording of this too, and I'm happy to share it with you if you reach out to me. And spread the word. I would appreciate it if you like this webinar, you find it useful, to share it with others who are in your network too. So with that, I know we're at the top of the hour, but I scheduled this for an hour and 15 minutes so I can also answer questions. So I appreciate everybody who attended. Hopefully this was helpful. There's a lot of information here, I know, but we only had an hour, so I wanted to hit the highlights, and hopefully you found it useful. So I'm going to get into the questions. I'm going to the Q&A right now. So David asks, David Cronshaw. Hi, David. What steps should traditional media companies do to start innovating and experimenting with Gen AI in different multimodal types? It's really, David, it's the kind of the concrete steps that I mentioned. I think it's really important to get new voices in traditional media companies. So hiring new bodies to focus on these issues who can be resources for all the bodies in your media organization. I think that's really important. And, I've been around the block now, so I can say this. I think fresh voices, young voices are very important to bring into an organization. So fresh blood is important. I think that inviting companies in to present, to learn from, to perhaps even collaborate with, do some partnerships with, maybe even invest in, like Disney Accelerator. Disney created an accelerator, a tech accelerator years ago, because they wanted to make small investments in companies so they could watch them, see what they're doing, learn from them, grow from them, and ultimately, if they really like them, buy them. So those are some of the things. Mike Bevel says, if there's no copyright in AI generated content, how can a creator, owner, et cetera, enforce any monetization model they want to implement? AI only works without any human involvement. Those are rejected by the Copyright Office. How much is enough human involvement, interaction with the AI to warrant copyright protection? That's the $64,000 question, Mike. It just is. This is a new body that's evolving in real time. That's why you need to follow this stuff very, very closely. Look at the court cases. But as I said, it could have been young Peter Csathy, who was a federal district court judge, who's writing the opinion, drawing that line. That's a little bit frightening. So all of us have for our own selves, have an interest in helping to shape where all of this goes. Kevin asks, fair use analysis requires one output to be compared to a claiming work, which may or may not be substantially similar. But must a rights holder consent to use at ingestion if a copy isn't made in the sweeping? Actually, Kevin, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, because if a copyrighted work is ingested, it is technically a copy is being made. Now it's a question of, that could be a needle in a haystack of content. So how much is enough to warrant a claim of copyright infringement? Nobody really knows, but the Andy Warhol case is something I would spend a lot of time looking at, because it's not just about substantial similarity. In fact, it was really interesting about that case. You had Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor on both very liberal judges who were in a very rare case, were literally fighting amongst themselves. I think it was Kagan on the dissent, and it was Sotomayor who was on the majority opinion that said that there's this new angle of a commercial opportunity, taking a business opportunity away from the creator. It wasn't just about substantial similarity. That was a new thread, a new aspect to this copyright analysis. And Kagan was saying, are you kidding me? You're going to do this? Andy Warhol had his unique style, and it was always substantial similarity before, and these two works are not substantially similar. So this was a fair use, which is a defense to the copyright infringement. Fast evolving, that case is going to spawn endless other litigation, but it's an important one. Stephen Saltzman says, even though the WJ was a 3-year solution, was a 3-year punt, as you say, there were at least certain, albeit small, gains made by disregarding machine-generated contributions to the work. Why would they not have sought to protect those gains by adding a survival clause so that this clause at least stays in place until a new deal is concluded? It's an interesting point, Stephen. If there's a clause, if something's already been resolved, then the writers have a better hand in saying that this is the way that the world should be. But just like any deal, it's in place for a limited period of time. The world changes significantly. The players at the table and their sensibilities change significantly. So everything's open again. And it's just really getting the best minds and bodies at the negotiating table, whatever position you're on, to make the case for whatever position you want to make. and to have the kind of world that you think it should be, because there is no one right way for any of this. The emotions at the negotiating table, the personalities, the experiences, there's different outcomes depending on whether you or I are the lead negotiator at a table. There just are. Doesn't mean one's better or worse, but I think people forget this all the time, that there's so many elements that are idiosyncratic that lead to the results that we ultimately all live by for generations. I think that those are pretty much the Q&A questions. I see a couple chat. Let's see. Hi, Peter. Nick Rawlinson. Hey, Nick, how are you doing? I work for a major sports league. The concept of endless iterations intrigues me. Think testing a new video game, iterated unlimited scenarios optimized for target customers. This isn't a process that we can wholly replicate in the live entertainment industry. To what extent do you see technology optimizing digital products to the extent that live sports properties can no longer compete? Great question. I think that first of all, let's talk about live. There's a reason why sporting events, music events, T-Swizzle, there's a music festivals. My Minnesota Vikings, who beat the 49ers yesterday, and I'm thrilled. I didn't expect it. Nobody expected it. I'm thrilled. That's the beauty of live sports. Nothing's going to take that away. I absolutely believe nothing's going to take that away. There's a reason why all these venue-based opportunities are expanding. Festivals are expanding. I write about it a lot, where I think that there's this there's this human need for human interaction that will never go away. And so as we get increasingly digital, there's this human aspect to what we do. We need that. We crave that. So the live in person will never go away. I've written a couple of columns recently about that. I feel that to my bones, Nick. But that doesn't mean that they can't be experienced in different kinds of ways. I mean, if you're a major sports league, you're already, taking the videos of it, creating new experiences, taking the players, creating merch, doing all these kinds of things that don't cannibalize the live in venue experience. They just augment it, present new ways, new opportunities to experience those moments. It may be the full event, or maybe portions of it, or it may be, imagine this. Take the Minnesota Vikings of today and use generative AI to sweep in all the data of, statistics, the players, et cetera. Have 2023 Minnesota Vikings play the 1998, I think it was, Minnesota Vikings, who were 15-1 that year, who were supposed to go to the Super Bowl, lost in the championship game because of a missed field goal, where the field goal kicker never missed the entire season. I was at the 50-yard line. I lost my mind. I couldn't believe it, but I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, so I could believe it. But you know what I mean? You have the 2023 Vikings against the 1999 Vikings, and you create this game, like you feel like you're at the game. You're watching it on TV, but it's all generated by new technology, something not possible today that will be possible. So Nick, I think that the opportunities are amazing. And that's not cannibalizing the actual games today in that particular case. There's so many different things. You can take the videos and create personalized reels, highlight reels for me, for you, that will just be different, because it will take our, what we like, our user behavior, and auto-generate it automatically. And that will not require, increasingly, it will not require actual human editing of any kind. It will just be auto-generated, so done cost effectively, and creating new monetization, which is just a new experience that doesn't necessarily cannibalize the other ways you're already monetizing. So hopefully that's helpful. But I believe very strongly that there's going to be, if you're in a sports league, it's fascinating the different things you're going to be able to do. So let's see if there's anything else. I have a few minutes left. Kevin, you said you'd like to see the deck. Just I know you put it in here, your email address. Just send me an email at peter@creativemedia.biz. That will be easier for me to just, for any of you who want to see the deck, just send me a quick note. And also, everybody out there, I really would appreciate and value feedback of whether you found this useful, not useful, whether I went too fast. I did have some caffeine this morning. But I'm always passionate about this stuff. So with or without caffeine, I think it's exciting times. It's daunting times. But I always tell myself the same thing I'm telling all of you. Got to be stoic about it. This is the way the world is. How do we react to it? That's the key. And hopefully I gave you some clues and ideas on how to do that. And I'm passionate about this stuff. I see a lot of different things. I'm happy to help. Like the sports league, it's a passion of mine. I'd be thrilled to, help you think things through and be a resource for you, or in the music space or whatever it may be. Those are my passions. So follow my stuff. If you like it, share it. And I'm here and available. I don't think there's anything else. If anybody else has a final question, put it in the chat right now. I don't see any chats that are pending. So I'll wait a few minutes or a minute or two. I don't think so. So thanks for attending, guys. Send me your comments and please feel free to be candid. I can take it. Thanks.